The cattle baron Ethan Fairmont never expected to witness the impossible on a scorching June afternoon in 1884. But there she was, his housekeeper Lily Morrison, standing perfectly still in the middle of 2,000 head of spooked longhorns while every hired hand on the ranch froze in terror. The day had started like any other on the sprawling Fairmont Ranch just outside Sacramento, California. Ethan had risen before dawn, as was his custom, washing his face in the basin that Lily always left filled with fresh water the night before. He was a man of 32 years, broad-shouldered and weathered from a lifetime under the California sun, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He had built his cattle empire from nothing, starting with 100 head inherited from his father, and turning it into one of the most successful operations in the Sacramento Valley. Lily had come to work for him 2 years prior, arriving on the afternoon stage with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a letter of reference from a family in San Francisco. She was 24 then, with auburn hair she kept pinned in a practical bun and green eyes that seemed to notice everything. She was efficient, quiet, and kept his household running with a precision that impressed even his most exacting standards. But Ethan had never truly seen her, not really, until that afternoon when everything changed. The morning had been spent reviewing the books with his foreman, a grizzled veteran named Jack Hennessy who had been with Ethan since the beginning. The numbers were good. The spring calving had gone well, and they were preparing to drive a portion of the herd to market in San Francisco within the month. Ethan had been in fine spirits when he decided to ride out and inspect the main herd grazing in the south pasture. Lily had been hanging laundry when she saw him mount his bay gelding. She paused, a sheet in her hands, and watched him ride off with that easy grace he had in the saddle. She had become accustomed to the rhythm of his days, knew his habits better than he probably knew them himself. She knew he took his coffee black, that he preferred his eggs fried hard, that he read by lamplight every evening after supper, usually histories or agricultural journals. She knew the way his brow furrowed when he was working through a difficult problem, and the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face when something genuinely pleased him. What Lily had not shared with anyone, what she kept locked away in the private chambers of her heart, was that she had fallen in love with Ethan Fairmont somewhere between her first winter at the ranch and the spring that followed. It had happened gradually, in small moments. The way he always thanked her for meals, his courtesy to everyone regardless of their station, his fairness with the ranch hands, the gentle way he handled the horses. She had watched him from windows and doorways, learning the landscape of his character, and found it more compelling than any mountain vista or sunset over the valley. But Lily Morrison knew her place. She was the housekeeper, a woman alone in the world with no family and no prospects beyond the wages she earned. Ethan Fairmont was a cattle baron, a man of property and standing in the community. The gulf between them was as wide as the Sacramento River in flood season, and she had resigned herself to loving him from a distance, to finding satisfaction in keeping his home, in the small moments when she could be useful to him. The trouble started just after noon. Ethan had been riding the perimeter of the south pasture with Jack when they spotted a rattlesnake sunning itself on a rock near the herd. Before either man could react, a young heifer stumbled too close, and the snake struck. The heifer bellowed in pain and panic, leaping sideways into the nearest cluster of cattle. It was like watching a match touch dry kindling. Within seconds, the entire herd was in motion, 2,000 animals moving as one massive, terrified organism. Ethan and Jack spurred their horses, racing to get ahead of the stampede, to try to turn it before the cattle scattered across the valley or worse, trampled themselves in their panic. But cattle in full stampede are a force of nature, unstoppable as a rock slide. The ground shook with the thunder of 8,000 hooves, and dust rose in choking clouds that turned the afternoon sun into a hazy red disk. Lily had been in the kitchen preparing the evening meal when she heard the rumbling. At first she thought it might be an earthquake, not uncommon in California. But the rumbling grew louder, more rhythmic, and when she stepped out onto the back porch, she could see the dust cloud rising from the south pasture. Her heart seized in her chest. Ethan was out there. Without thinking, without pausing to consider the danger or the impropriety, she gathered her skirts and ran. The ranch house sat on a slight rise overlooking the pastures, and Lily could see the situation unfolding below her as she ran. The herd was stampeding straight toward a narrow ravine that cut through the eastern section of the property. If they went over the edge, dozens would die, perhaps hundreds. The ranch hands were trying desperately to turn them, but the cattle were beyond reasoning, beyond control. Lily had grown up on a small farm in Missouri before her parents died of cholera when she was 16. They had kept dairy cows, nothing like these wild longhorns, but she understood cattle in a way that city-raised people never could. She understood their herd instincts, their fears, the way they responded to calm confidence more than to shouting and chaos. She did not run toward the ravine where the men were trying to turn the herd. Instead, she ran to intercept them further back, closer to where the stampede had originated. Her lungs burned and her legs ached by the time she reached the pasture fence, but she did not slow down. She climbed the rail fence with a speed born of desperation and dropped into the pasture just as the leading edge of the herd came into view. Any sane person would have run. Any reasonable person would have sought safety. But Lily Morrison had stopped being entirely reasonable the moment she had fallen in love with Ethan Fairmont, and she knew that losing hundreds of cattle would devastate him, might even ruin him financially. She could not bear that. She stood in the middle of the pasture, directly in the path of the stampede, and she began to sing. It was a hymn her mother had taught her, a slow, melodic tune about still waters and green pastures. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the thunder of hooves. She spread her arms wide, making herself as large as possible, and she did not move. She simply stood there, singing, her voice unwavering even as the ground shook beneath her feet and the wall of cattle bore down on her. Ethan saw her from 100 yards away and felt his heart stop. He recognized her dress, the particular shade of blue she favored, and for a moment his mind could not comprehend what he was seeing. His housekeeper was standing in the path of a cattle stampede. His quiet, efficient, sensible housekeeper was going to be killed, trampled into the California earth, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He was too far away, moving in the wrong direction, and even if he could reach her, there was no time. He opened his mouth to scream her name, but no sound came out. He could only watch in horror as the leading steers came within 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet of where she stood. And then the impossible happened. The lead steer, a massive red beast with horns spanning 6 feet, slowed. Its head came up, ears forward, focused on the small woman singing in its path. The steers behind it had no choice but to slow as well, and like a wave breaking against a jetty, the stampede began to lose its momentum. Cattle milled and turned, confused but no longer in full panic. More and more of them slowed, stopped, stood listening to that clear, steady voice singing about peace and safety. Lily kept singing. She could see the lead steer now, could see its rolling eyes and heaving sides, but she did not flinch. She sang verse after verse, and slowly, miraculously, The herd settled. The stampede was over. Ethan reached her first, throwing himself from his horse before the animal had fully stopped. His hands were shaking as he gripped her shoulders, his face pale beneath its tan. For a long moment he could not speak. He simply held her, his fingers digging into her arms as though to convince himself she was real, that she was alive. "Are you out of your mind?" The words finally burst from him, rough with emotion. "You could have been killed. You almost were killed. What possessed you to do something so reckless, so foolish?" Lily looked up at him, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the calculated concern of a man facing a business problem, but raw, visceral terror. It was the look of a man who had almost lost something precious. "The cattle," she said simply. "They were headed for the ravine. I thought I might be able to slow them." "Slow them?" Ethan's voice rose despite himself. "You could have been trampled to death. Do you understand that? Do you comprehend what almost happened?" The other ranch hands had begun to arrive, staring at Lily with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Jack Hennessy removed his hat, shaking his head slowly. "I have never seen anything like that in 40 years of working cattle," he said quietly. "Madam, that was either the bravest or the craziest thing I have ever witnessed, possibly both." Lily felt her knees begin to tremble as the reality of what she had done caught up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last few minutes was draining away, leaving her shaky and light-headed. Ethan must have felt it, because his grip on her shoulders tightened, holding her steady. "Get the herd settled and checked for injuries," Ethan ordered his men, never taking his eyes off Lily. "I am taking Miss Morrison back to the house." He lifted her into his saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. Lily tried to protest that she could walk, but her voice came out thready and weak. She felt Ethan's arm come around her waist, solid and secure, and she allowed herself to lean back against his chest as they rode toward the house. They did not speak during the ride. Lily was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, the warmth of his body against her back, the strength of his arm holding her safe. Her heart was pounding, though whether from the aftermath of danger or from his proximity, she could not say. When they reached the house, Ethan dismounted and lifted her down. Her legs were steadier now, but he kept his hands at her waist, looking down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You saved my herd," he said finally. "Saved my ranch, most likely. I do not know how to thank you." "I did what anyone would have done," Lily replied, though they both knew that was not true. "No," Ethan said firmly. "You did what no one else thought to do. You did what no one else would have dared to do." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Lily, I need to know. Why did you risk your life like that?" Lily met his eyes, and for a moment she considered telling him the truth. That she loved him. That she would have done anything to protect him from loss. That the thought of him hurting was more frightening to her than her own death. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said, "This ranch is my home. You have been good to me. I could not stand by and do nothing." Ethan searched her face, and Lily had the unsettling feeling that he could see far more than she wanted to reveal. But after a moment, he simply nodded and released her. "Go inside and rest," he said gently. "You have had enough excitement for one day. I will manage supper myself tonight." Lily wanted to argue, but she was suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. She nodded and made her way into the house, feeling Ethan's gaze following her until she disappeared inside. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Lily tried to rest, as Ethan had ordered, but she found herself pacing her small room off the kitchen, unable to settle. Her mind kept replaying those terrible moments when she had stood before the stampede, but even more, it kept circling back to the way Ethan had held her, the fear in his voice, the tenderness in his touch. Downstairs, Ethan was having his own reckoning. He had sent one of the hands to check on the heifer that had been snake-bit. The animal would likely survive, though she would be lame for a while. The rest of the herd had suffered no serious injuries in the stampede, thanks to Lily's intervention. It was nothing short of a miracle. But Ethan found he could not focus on his good fortune. His mind was entirely occupied with his housekeeper. He kept seeing her standing in that pasture, small and defiant and impossibly brave. He kept feeling the way his heart had seized when he thought she would die. He kept remembering the way she had felt in his arms, the scent of her hair, the delicate strength of her frame. Ethan Fairmont was not a man given to self-deception. He had built his success on the ability to see things clearly and act decisively. And as he stood in his study, staring unseeing at his account books, he was forced to acknowledge a truth he had been avoiding for months. He was in love with his housekeeper. He could not say exactly when it had happened. Perhaps it had been gradual, like water wearing away stone. Perhaps it had been building in small moments he had not allowed himself to examine too closely. The way she hummed while she worked, the care she took with everything she touched, the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the companionable silence that fell between them on the rare occasions when they occupied the same room in the evening, she mending by the fire, he reading in his chair. Ethan had convinced himself that his contentment with this arrangement was simply the satisfaction of a well-run household. But today, when he had thought he would lose her, the truth had crashed over him with the force of that stampede. He loved her. He loved Lily Morrison with an intensity that shocked him. The question was, what could he do about it? She was his employee. To declare his feelings would put her in an impossible position. If she did not share his feelings, she might feel obligated to leave, and the thought of this house without her was unbearable. If she did share his feelings, she might wonder if he was taking advantage of his position, might think less of him for the impropriety. Ethan was still wrestling with these thoughts when evening came. Lily, recovered from her earlier shock, had come downstairs despite his instructions to rest, and had prepared supper as usual. She had made beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, using the last of the preserved apples from the previous fall. It was simple food, but perfectly prepared, and the house smelled wonderful. Ethan came to the table in the formal dining room, as was his habit. Normally, Lily would serve his meal and then retire to eat her own supper in the kitchen. But tonight, emboldened by the strange intimacy that had grown between them that afternoon, Ethan made a decision. "Lily," he called as she set his plate before him. "Would you join me?" She turned to him, surprise evident in her expression. "Sir." "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Have supper with me. After what you did today, eating alone in the kitchen seems wrong." Lily hesitated. It was highly irregular, would set tongues wagging if any of the ranch hands found out. But there was something in Ethan's eyes, a vulnerability she had never seen before, that made it impossible to refuse. "If you wish," she said quietly, and went to fetch another plate. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of silverware and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Ethan seemed to be gathering his thoughts, and Lily waited, her heart beating faster with each passing second. Finally, Ethan set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I have been thinking about what happened today," he began, "about what you did and why you might have done it." Lily's hand stilled on her napkin. "I explained that," she said carefully. "The ranch is my home. I could not stand by." "Yes, you said that." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "But Lily, you could have been killed. Most people, even people who care deeply about their home, would not risk their life like that. There are easier ways to find employment, safer places to live. So I find myself wondering if perhaps there was another reason, a more personal reason. Lily felt heat rising to her cheeks. She wanted to look away, to deflect, but she found herself caught in his gaze. "What are you asking me, Ethan?" It was the first time she had used his given name, and she saw the effect it had on him. His eyes darkened, and he drew in a sharp breath. "I am asking," he said slowly, "if you might care for this ranch, for this home, because of more than just walls and land. If you might care for the man who owns it." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Lily knew that what she said next would change everything, for better or worse. She could deny it, could retreat behind the safe walls of propriety and distance. Or she could be brave, the way she had been brave in that pasture. "I might," she whispered, "if that man cared for me in return." Ethan stood so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. For a terrible moment, Lily thought she had made a mistake, that she had misread everything. But then he was around the table, pulling her to her feet, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Lily Morrison," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been a fool. I have been living in this house with you for 2 years, and I have been content with your presence without understanding why. I told myself you were simply an excellent housekeeper. I convinced myself that the happiness I felt when I came home each evening was satisfaction with a well-managed household. But today, when I thought I would lose you, I understood the truth. I love you. I am desperately, completely in love with you." Lily felt tears spring to her eyes. "Truly." "Truly," Ethan confirmed. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love your competence and your quiet grace. I love the way you hum when you think no one is listening, and the way you arrange flowers from the garden on the hall table. I love coming home to you. I love existing in the same world as you. And if you could find it in your heart to care for a rough cattleman who has taken far too long to see what was right in front of him, I would count myself the most fortunate man in California." "Oh, Ethan," Lily breathed. "I have loved you for more than a year. I have loved you through every season, through every ordinary day. I loved you when I thought it was impossible, when I believed you could never see me as anything more than your housekeeper. I loved you anyway, because I could not help myself." Ethan's thumb traced the line of her cheek, catching a tear that had escaped. "Then marry me," he said. "Not because you work for me, not because I am asking as your employer. I am asking as a man who loves a woman who wants to spend the rest of his life with her. Marry me, Lily. Be my wife." Lily's breath caught. It was too much, too fast, and yet it felt absolutely right. "Are you certain?" she asked. "People will talk. The difference in our stations, there is no difference," Ethan interrupted firmly. "You are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You saved my livelihood today. You have made my house a home. Any man would be honored to call you his wife. I am asking if you will honor me by saying yes." Lily looked up into his face, at the sincerity burning in his whiskey-colored eyes, and she felt the last of her doubts melt away. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." He kissed her then, tender and reverent, as though she were something precious that might break. Lily had never been kissed before, but she responded instinctively, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Ethan's eyes held a warmth that made Lily's knees weak. "I should do this properly," he said, and before she could ask what he meant, he dropped to one knee before her. "Lily Morrison, you have my heart and my devotion. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of sharing my life, of letting me love you for all the days we have remaining?" Lily laughed, a sound of pure joy, even as more tears streamed down her face. I already said yes, you foolish man, but yes again, 1,000 times yes. Ethan rose and gathered her into his arms, and they stood there in the dining room, holding each other as the sun set outside the windows and painted the California sky in shades of gold and crimson. The news of their engagement spread through the ranch with the speed of wildfire. The ranch hands, who had witnessed Lily's bravery with the stampede, were universally supportive. Jack Hennessy, in particular, seemed pleased, telling Ethan that it was about time he settled down with a good woman. The reaction in Sacramento proper was more mixed. Some of the society ladies, who had set their caps for the wealthy cattle baron, were scandalized that he would marry his housekeeper. But Ethan had never cared much for society's opinion, and Lily had never moved in those circles anyway. The people whose opinions mattered, the ranchers and merchants and ordinary folk who made up the backbone of the community, were happy for them. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Sacramento. Lily wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Ethan had ordered specially from San Francisco, along with a veil of delicate lace. She looked radiant, her auburn hair gleaming in the light streaming through the church windows, her green eyes bright with happiness. Ethan wore his best suit, though he had privately told Lily that he felt like an impostor in such fine clothes. She had laughed and kissed him and told him he looked magnificent. Standing at the altar, watching her walk down the aisle toward him, Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. This brave, beautiful woman had chosen him, and he vowed silently to spend every day for the rest of his life making sure she never regretted it. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Lily with a tenderness that brought tears to more than a few eyes among the assembled guests. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, stepping out into the bright California sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Fairmont. The wedding breakfast was held at the ranch house, which Lily had spent days preparing. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food and drink. The ranch hands mingled with townspeople, and fiddle music filled the air. Ethan barely left Lily's side all day, his hand constantly seeking hers, as though he needed the reassurance that she was real, that this happiness was not a dream. As the sun began to set, and the guests started to depart, Ethan finally led Lily away from the festivities and up to the bedroom that would now be theirs together. Lily had moved her few possessions from her small room off the kitchen during the week before the wedding, and seeing her hairbrush on the dresser, her nightgown laid out on the bed, filled Ethan with a contentment so profound it almost hurt. Their wedding night was everything it should be, tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, Lily lay curled against Ethan's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked quietly, his fingers trailing through her unbound hair. "More than I ever thought possible," Lily replied honestly. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that you truly love me." Ethan tilted her face up to his. "Believe it," he said firmly. "I love you more than words can express. You are my wife, my partner, the other half of my soul. I will remind you of that every day for the rest of our lives if necessary." Lily smiled and kissed him softly. "I love you too, Ethan Fairmont. Thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me." "How could I not?" Ethan murmured against her lips. "You are extraordinary, Lily. You always have been. I was just too blind to recognize it at first." They fell asleep tangled in each other's arms, and when Ethan woke the next morning to find Lily beside him, her hair spread across the pillow like silk, he felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to his eyes. This was his life now. This woman, this love, this profound sense of belonging. He had been alone for so long, building his empire, focused on success and security. But none of it had brought him the joy he felt in this simple moment, watching his wife sleep. The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and discovery. Lily was no longer the housekeeper, though she still enjoyed cooking and maintaining their home. Ethan hired a woman from town to help with the heavier cleaning, wanting to free Lily from the burden of servants' work. But Lily found she enjoyed being the mistress of the house, planning menus and managing the household in a new way, as a partner rather than an employee. She also became more involved in the ranch operations. Her understanding of cattle, so dramatically demonstrated during the stampede, proved to be genuine and deep. Ethan began consulting with her on decisions, valuing her insights. Together, they made plans for the future, discussing breeding programs and market strategies late into the evening, their conversations interspersed with kisses and laughter. The cattle drive to San Francisco that fall was the most successful Ethan had ever conducted. The herd was in prime condition, and he negotiated excellent prices. When he returned to the ranch after 2 weeks away, Lily ran to meet him, and he swept her into his arms, kissing her soundly in front of all the hands. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "Never again." "If there is another drive, you are coming with me." Lily laughed, but her eyes were damp. "I missed you too. The house felt empty without you." That winter was mild by California standards, and Lily and Ethan spent long evenings by the fire, talking and planning. It was during one of these evenings, in late January of 1885, that Lily told Ethan she was expecting a child. Ethan's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He stared at her for a moment, processing the news, and then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "You are pleased?" Lily asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Pleased." Ethan set her down gently, his hands moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Lily, I am overjoyed, thrilled, astounded. You have already given me more happiness than I knew existed, and now this. A child. Our child." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Lily felt her heart overflow with love for this man who had once been just her employer, and who was now her husband, her partner, her everything. The months of Lily's pregnancy were a time of great happiness on the ranch. Ethan became even more protective than usual, though Lily laughingly protested that she was not an invalid. He worried constantly, fussing over her health, insisting she rest, bringing her little gifts from town. Lily was both touched and amused by his devotion, and she loved him all the more for it. The baby came in early September, a long labor that had Ethan pacing the floor downstairs, while the doctor and a midwife from town attended Lily. When the baby's first cry rang out, Ethan took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom with his heart in his throat. Lily lay exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat but smiling radiantly, and in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny red-faced baby. "A son," the midwife announced. "You have a fine, healthy son, Mr. Fairmont." Ethan approached the bed on trembling legs. He had faced stampedes and rustlers and financial ruin without flinching, but the sight of his wife holding their newborn child unmanned him completely. He sank onto the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny person they had created. "A son," he repeated softly. "Lily, he is perfect." "You are perfect. How are you? Are you well?" "Tired," Lily admitted. "But so happy, Ethan. Look at him. Look at what we made." Ethan gently touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled instinctively around his father's much larger finger. The gesture undid Ethan completely, and tears streamed down his face. "Thank you," he whispered to Lily. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for loving me, for marrying me, for giving me this family. I love you so much, Lily." "I love you too," Lily said, her own eyes wet. "We are so blessed, Ethan. So very blessed." They named the baby Elijah after Ethan's father, with the middle name of James. Little Elijah Fairmont was a healthy, vocal baby who kept his parents up at night and filled the ranch house with new sounds and new life. Ethan, who had never held a baby before his own son was born, became adept at changing nappies and walking the floor with a fussy infant. He sang to Elijah in a surprisingly good baritone, old trail songs and hymns, and the baby would often settle in his father's arms when nothing else would soothe him. Lily watched her husband with their son and felt her love for him deepen even further. Ethan was a natural father, patient and gentle and utterly devoted. He would come in from a long day working the ranch and head straight for the nursery, scooping up Elijah with a joy that never seemed to diminish. As Elijah grew from infant to toddler, he proved to have his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. He was an active, curious child, and by the time he was 2, he was toddling around the ranch, getting into everything. The ranch hands adored him, and it was not uncommon to find the young master of the house being carried on the shoulders of some cowboy, laughing with delight. In the spring of 1887, Lily discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with equal joy but less surprise. Ethan was again wonderfully attentive, and Elijah, now nearly 2, seemed to sense something was different about his mother, becoming more gentle and careful around her. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Louise, arrived in November of 1887. She had Lily's auburn hair and Ethan's whiskey-colored eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Ethan, who had been raised in a world of men and cattle, discovered that having a daughter was an entirely different experience from having a son. Emma was more delicate than Elijah had been as a baby, more sensitive, and Ethan found himself singing her to sleep every night, unable to resist her sweet face. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch continued to prosper under Ethan's management and Lily's partnership. They expanded their operations, buying additional land and increasing the size of their herd. Ethan's reputation as a fair and honest cattleman grew, and the Fairmont Ranch became known as one of the best-run operations in California. Lily became a respected figure in Sacramento society, not because of her position as a cattle baron's wife, but because of her own merits. She was intelligent, kind, and generous, and she used the Fairmont resources to help those less fortunate. She started a small school for ranch children, hiring a teacher from San Francisco and converting one of the outbuildings into a classroom. She organized charity drives for widows and orphans, and she made sure that anyone who came to the Fairmont Ranch looking for work or help received it. Ethan watched his wife's activities with pride and love. She had grown from the quiet housekeeper into a confident, capable woman who moved through the world with grace and purpose. She was still the same person at her core, still kind and thoughtful and brave, but marriage and motherhood had allowed her to blossom in ways that took Ethan's breath away. In 1890, when Elijah was 5 and Emma was 3, Lily became pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, and the doctor advised caution and rest. Ethan was beside himself with worry, hovering over Lily constantly, until she finally had to order him to go attend to the ranch before everything fell apart. Their third child, another son they named Thomas Edward, arrived in early 1891 after a difficult labor that frightened Ethan terribly. But both mother and baby came through safely, and Thomas proved to be a robust, healthy infant with a lusty cry and an appetite that amazed everyone. With 3 children, the ranch house was constantly full of noise and activity. Ethan, now approaching 40, sometimes felt tired in ways he never had before, but he was also happier than he had ever imagined possible. Coming home in the evening to find Lily in the parlor, perhaps reading to the children or helping Elijah with his letters, filled him with a contentment so profound, it still sometimes brought him to his knees with gratitude. Lily, for her part, marveled at the life she had built. Sometimes she thought back to that scared, lonely girl who had arrived in Sacramento with nothing but a carpet bag and a letter of reference. She remembered the quiet housekeeper who had gone about her duties, hiding her love for her employer, believing that happiness like this could never be hers. And then she would look at Ethan, at the way he smiled at her across the dinner table, at the way he held their children, at the way he still kissed her goodnight every evening as though she were precious beyond measure, and she would be reminded all over again that miracles did happen. That love could transform everything. That standing in front of that stampede, gambling her life on the slim chance she could save Ethan's herd, had been the best decision she had ever made. The turning point had been that supper, when Ethan had asked her to join him at the table, when he had laid his heart bare and asked her to be his wife. Everything good in her life had flowed from that moment, from his courage in speaking his feelings and her courage in admitting her own. In 1893, when Elijah was 8, Emma was 6, and Thomas was 2, the Fairmont family took a trip to San Francisco. It was the first real vacation they had taken as a family, and the children were wildly excited. They stayed in a hotel overlooking the bay, and Ethan showed his family the sights of the city. One evening, as they walked along the waterfront after dinner, Emma and Elijah running ahead to look at the ships while Thomas rode on Ethan's shoulders, Lily slipped her hand into her husband's free hand. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked down at her in surprise. "Regret what? This life. Marrying me. Sometimes I think about those society ladies who disapproved, who thought you married beneath you. I wonder if you ever wish you had made a different choice." Ethan stopped walking, bringing them to a halt. He lifted Thomas from his shoulders and set him down, then turned to face Lily fully, taking both her hands in his. "Lily Fairmont," he said seriously, "you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Marrying you was not just the right choice, it was the only choice. My life before you was empty, hollow, focused on accumulation and success, but devoid of real meaning. You gave me love. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to build something that would last beyond my own lifetime. Every morning I wake up next to you is a gift. Every evening I come home to you and our children is a blessing. I have never regretted one single moment of our life together, and I never will." Lily felt tears sting her eyes, even as she smiled. "You always know exactly what to say." "I only speak the truth," Ethan said, leaning down to kiss her gently. "I love you, Lily. I loved you 8 years ago when I asked you to marry me, and I love you even more now. You are my heart, my home, my everything." "And you are mine," Lily whispered back, "always and forever." They stood there on the San Francisco waterfront, holding each other while their children played nearby, and the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared over the years, and yet it felt special, significant. Ethan thought back to that afternoon in June of 1884, when he had watched in terror as Lily stood before a stampede. He remembered the moment he had realized he loved her, the fear and wonder and overwhelming emotion. He remembered asking her to marry him at that supper, his heart pounding, uncertain of her answer but unable to keep silent any longer. The best decision of his life had been opening his heart to his housekeeper. The woman who had saved his herd had also saved him, had brought him a richness of life he had never known existed. The years continued to pass, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. The cattle business had its ups and downs, years of good prices and years of struggle, but the Fairmont ranch persevered. Ethan's partnership with Lily extended to all aspects of their lives, and they made decisions together, shared burdens together, celebrated victories together. The children grew. Elijah became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and learning. Ethan had hopes he might go to university someday, become a lawyer or a teacher. Emma was spirited and adventurous, more interested in horses and cattle than in dolls and sewing. Thomas was still young, but already showing signs of his father's business acumen, always negotiating for extra cookies or a later bedtime. In 1895, when Lily was 35 and Ethan was 43, they welcomed their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Catherine May. She was a surprise, unexpected but deeply loved, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. By the late 1890s, the Fairmont Ranch was one of the most successful in California. Ethan's careful management and Lily's insights had paid off, and they had built something to be proud of, something that would provide for their children and grandchildren. But more than the material success, what mattered to both Ethan and Lily was the love they had built. Their marriage had only deepened over the years, the initial passion maturing into something richer and more enduring. They had weathered illness and loss, celebrated births and achievements, and through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense. Ethan still looked at Lily sometimes and marveled that she had chosen him. He would watch her with their children, or managing some aspect of the household, or simply sitting quietly reading, and he would be struck anew by her strength and grace. She was no longer the young woman who had stood before a stampede, but she was still brave, still remarkable, still the love of his life. Lily still remembered falling in love with Ethan when he was simply her employer, when loving him had seemed impossible. She remembered the way her heart had soared when he asked her to marry him, the disbelief and joy that had flooded through her. And now, after more than a decade of marriage, after 4 children and countless shared experiences, she loved him even more deeply than she had then. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Ethan had taken Lily back to the church where they had been married. They stood at the altar again, just the two of them, and renewed their vows privately, recommitting to each other. "I promise to love you for all my days," Ethan had said, his voice thick with emotion. "To stand beside you in joy and sorrow, in prosperity and hardship. You are my wife, my partner, my dearest friend. I will cherish you until my last breath." "And I promise to love you with all my heart," Lily had replied, tears streaming down her face. "To support your dreams and share your burdens. You saw me when I was invisible. You loved me when I thought I was unworthy of love. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I am yours, Ethan, now and always." They had kissed then, a kiss of renewal and promise, and when they left the church hand in hand, Lily had looked up at her husband and smiled through her tears. 10 years, she had said softly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "Many more to come," Ethan had promised. "We have decades ahead of us, my love. Decades to love each other, to watch our children grow, to build our life together." And so it proved. The years rolled on, bringing the new century and all its changes. The railroad came closer to Sacramento, making it easier to ship cattle. Automobiles began to appear on the streets of the city, though Ethan preferred his horses. The world was changing, but the love between Ethan and Lily Fairmont remained constant. Elijah went off to university in 1899, studying law as his father had hoped. Emma, at 12, was already an accomplished horsewoman, helping manage the ranch's breeding program. Thomas, at 8, showed a keen interest in the business side of the operation, always asking questions about costs and profits. And little Catherine, at 4, was the baby of the family, doted on by her siblings and parents alike. In 1901, when Lily was 41 and Ethan was 49, they took another trip, this time just the two of them, leaving the children in the care of Jack Hennessy and his wife, who had come to work as the Fairmonts' housekeeper years before. They traveled to the coast, to a small town north of San Francisco, and rented a cottage overlooking the ocean. For 2 weeks, they did nothing but walk on the beach, read, talk, and simply be together. It was a gift they gave themselves, a chance to reconnect as a couple away from the demands of the ranch and their children. One evening, as they sat on the cottage porch watching the sun set over the Pacific, Ethan pulled Lily close against his side. "You remember that day with the stampede?" he asked quietly. Lily smiled. "How could I forget? It changed everything." "I think about it sometimes," Ethan admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I ever really had you. If you had been killed that day, I would never have told you I loved you. I would never have married you, never had our children, never known this life. The thought terrifies me even now, all these years later." Lily turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. "But I was not killed. I was saved, we were saved, and we have had 17 years of love and happiness. Do not dwell on what might have been, my darling. Celebrate what is." Ethan kissed her palm. "You are right, as always. And what is wonderful beyond measure. I love you, Lily. I have loved you for 17 years, and I will love you for 17 more and 17 after that, and however many the Lord grants us." "And I love you," Lily replied, kissing him softly. "You are my miracle, Ethan Fairmont, my impossible dream come true." They made love that night with the windows open, the sound of the ocean a constant rhythm beneath their whispered words and sighs. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, a housekeeper and a cattle baron. It should never have worked. Society said they were too different, that the gap between their stations was too wide to bridge. But love had proven stronger than convention, braver than propriety. Love had transformed a working relationship into a partnership, loneliness into belonging, fear into courage. Lily thought about that young woman who had stood in a pasture and sung to a stampeding herd. She had been terrified, but she had done it anyway, because her love for Ethan had been stronger than her fear. And Ethan, in turn, had been brave enough to declare his feelings at supper that same evening, to propose marriage despite all the reasons he might have stayed silent. Their bravery had been rewarded with this life, this love, this family. And Lily knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choices again, would risk everything again, for the chance to be Ethan Fairmont's wife. The years continued to unfold. Elijah graduated from university and returned to Sacramento to practice law, but he also remained involved with the ranch, advising his father on legal matters and helping to modernize their contracts and business practices. He married in 1904, a sweet young woman named Sarah, and they gave Ethan and Lily their first grandchild in 1905, a boy they named Ethan Jr. Becoming grandparents was a new adventure for Ethan and Lily. Ethan, now in his 50s, had mellowed somewhat from the driven young cattleman he had been, and he took to grandparenthood with enthusiasm. He spoiled young Ethan terribly, much to Lily's amusement and Elijah's mock protests. Emma, true to her independent nature, shocked the family in 1906 by announcing she intended to study veterinary medicine. It was almost unheard of for a woman to pursue such a career, but Ethan and Lily, remembering the brave young woman who had calmed a stampede, supported her decision. Emma left for the East Coast to attend one of the few programs that would accept female students, and she wrote home regularly, full of excitement about her studies. Thomas, meanwhile, was showing every sign of becoming a rancher like his father. At 15, he was already deeply involved in the day-to-day operations of the ranch, and Ethan was quietly pleased that at least one of his children would likely carry on the family business. Catherine, the youngest, was growing into a beautiful young woman with her mother's kindness and her father's determination. At 10, she was still very much a child, but Lily could already see hints of the woman she would become. In 1907, Ethan turned 55. He had slowed down somewhat, no longer spending entire days in the saddle as he once had, but he was still healthy and active. Lily, at 47, was as beautiful to him as she had been at 26, perhaps more so. The years had given her a confidence and serenity that made her even more attractive. They celebrated Ethan's birthday with a large party at the ranch, attended by friends and family from all over California. As Ethan stood on the porch of the house he had built, looking out at the gathering, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had everything a man could want: a successful business, children who were finding their own paths in the world, grandchildren to spoil. And most importantly, he had Lily, still by his side after more than 20 years of marriage, still his partner and his love. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Ethan and Lily sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars come out over the California hills. 55 years, Ethan mused. It seems impossible. I still feel like that young man who first saw you step off the stage, carpetbag in hand, looking so determined and so lost all at once. Lily laughed softly. And I still feel like that nervous young woman who had no idea that the stern-looking cattle baron would become the love of her life. Was I stern? Ethan asked, amused. Very, Lily confirmed, but fair and kind underneath. I noticed that right away, the way you treated people with respect regardless of their position. It was one of the first things I loved about you. Ethan pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. And I noticed how efficiently you managed my household, how you seemed to anticipate my needs before I even articulated them. And then, of course, you stepped in front of a stampede and showed me just how extraordinary you truly were. We have had a good life, have we not? Lily asked softly. The best, Ethan agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible, and it is not over yet. We have many years ahead of us still, God willing. Many years, Lily echoed, to love each other and watch our family grow. I am looking forward to every one of them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently, the night sounds of the ranch a familiar symphony around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the cattle lowed softly in response. It was a sound Ethan had heard thousands of times, but tonight it seemed especially poignant, a reminder of the foundation on which their life together had been built. Cattle had brought them together, in a sense. If Lily had not stood in front of that stampede, if she had not shown such remarkable courage, would Ethan have realized he loved her? Or would they have continued in their employer-employee relationship indefinitely, both harboring secret feelings but never voicing them? It was impossible to know, but Ethan liked to think that they would have found their way to each other eventually. Love like theirs did not stay hidden forever. It was too bright, too powerful, too essential. Sooner or later it would have demanded acknowledgement. but he was grateful nonetheless for that June afternoon in 1884. Grateful for Lily's bravery, for his own courage in proposing that same evening at supper, for the leap of faith they had both taken in choosing each other, despite all the reasons they might not have. The years continued their relentless march. Emma completed her veterinary studies and returned to California in 1910, setting up a practice that served ranchers throughout the Sacramento Valley. She never married, declaring that her work was her passion, but she was happy and fulfilled, and that was what mattered to her parents. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Ethan gradually stepped back. In 1911, when Ethan was 59, he made Thomas a full partner in the business, recognizing that the younger man had the energy and vision to take the Fairmont Ranch into the future. Catherine, meanwhile, fell in love with a young teacher from Sacramento, and they married in 1913 when she was 18. The wedding was a joyous occasion, and Lily cried throughout the ceremony, remembering her own wedding nearly 30 years before. Elijah and Sarah had 3 more children by 1914, giving Ethan and Lily a total of 4 grandchildren to dote on. The ranch house, which had once echoed with the sounds of Ethan and Lily's own children, now rang with the laughter of grandchildren, and both Ethan and Lily loved every chaotic moment. In the spring of 1914, Ethan and Lily celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. They had a small dinner party with just their children and grandchildren, and Ethan raised his glass in a toast. 30 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 62 years, I made the best decision of my life. I asked this remarkable woman to be my wife, and somehow, miraculously, she said yes. Everything good in my life has flowed from that moment. My children, my grandchildren, the happiness and love that fill this house, all of it is because of Lily. So I raise my glass to my wife, my partner, the love of my life. Thank you for 30 years of joy. Here is to 30 more. Everyone clinked glasses and drank, and Lily, her eyes wet with tears, stood and moved to Ethan's side. He pulled her down onto his lap, propriety be damned, and kissed her soundly while their children laughed and the grandchildren giggled. I love you, Lily whispered against his lips. My darling Ethan, I love you more than ever. And I you, Ethan replied, his arms tight around her. Always and forever, my brave girl. The world outside was changing rapidly. War had broken out in Europe, though America had not yet been drawn in. Technology was advancing at a pace that sometimes left Ethan feeling bewildered. But here, on his ranch, with his wife in his arms and his family around him, the things that truly mattered remained constant. Love, family, partnership. These were the bedrock of a good life, and Ethan and Lily had built theirs on solid ground. As the evening wore on and the party wound down, Ethan and Lily walked out onto the porch, as they had done countless times over the decades. The California night was mild, the stars bright overhead, and the familiar sounds of the ranch enveloped them like a blanket. 30 years, Lily mused, leaning against Ethan's side. It has gone so quickly. And yet we have lived an entire lifetime in those 30 years, Ethan replied. We have built a family, raised children, created a legacy. We have loved each other through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard. I would not trade a single moment of it. Nor would I, Lily agreed. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. Do you remember that supper when you asked me to join you at the table? Every detail, Ethan said softly. I was terrified you would say no. Terrified you did not feel the same way, but I had to know. After watching you face that stampede, I could not go another day without telling you I loved you. I was so shocked, Lily admitted. So overwhelmed. I had loved you for so long, thinking it was hopeless, and then suddenly you were telling me you loved me too. It felt like a dream." "The best dream," Ethan corrected, "and one we have been living ever since." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had started from vastly different places but who had found each other, loved each other, built a life together. The cattle baron and his housekeeper. The employer and the employee. The man and the woman who had both been brave enough to reach for happiness when it presented itself. In 1916, America entered the Great War and Thomas, now 25, enlisted despite his parents' protests. Ethan and Lily were terrified for their son, but they were also proud of his courage and his sense of duty. He served with distinction and returned home safely in 1919, though he carried scars, both visible and invisible, from his time in the trenches. The post-war years brought changes to the ranch. The cattle market fluctuated wildly, and there were lean years that tested even Ethan's careful management. But they weathered these storms as they had weathered all the others, together, as partners. In 1920, Lily turned 60. She was still beautiful, her auburn hair now heavily streaked with silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Ethan, at 68, had slowed considerably, no longer able to ride or work as he once had, but his mind was sharp, and his love for Lily had not diminished one bit. They sat together on the porch that evening, as had become their habit over the years. Ethan had taken to using a cane, and his hands sometimes shook, but when he reached for Lily, his grip was still strong. 60 years you have walked this earth, he said gently, and I have been privileged to share more than half of them with you. You are as beautiful to me now as you were at 24, my darling. Lily smiled, though her eyes were bright with tears. You are a charming liar, Ethan Fairmont, but I love you for it. I never lie to you, Ethan protested. You are beautiful. You have always been beautiful, and more than that, you are good and kind and strong. You are the foundation of this family, the heart of this home. I thank God for you every single day. And I thank God for you, Lily replied, squeezing his hand. For your love, your partnership, your steadfast presence in my life. We have been blessed, Ethan, so very blessed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the ranch that had been their home for so many years. Somewhere in the house, they could hear the voices of grandchildren, for Elijah's family had come for dinner. The sounds of life, of family, of love. Ethan thought back to that proposal at supper, all those years ago. He had been so nervous, so uncertain, and yet so sure that he had to speak. Lily was too precious to lose to silence and propriety, and she had said yes, had chosen him, and in doing so had given him everything that mattered. In 1922, Ethan's health began to fail more seriously. He had been diagnosed with a heart condition, and the doctor warned that he needed to avoid stress and exertion. Ethan, stubborn as ever, insisted he was fine, but Lily could see the truth. Her strong, capable husband was aging, slowing down, and she felt a clutch of fear whenever she thought about a future without him. But she did not dwell on it. Instead, she focused on the present, on treasuring every moment they had together. They took walks around the ranch grounds, slow now but still meaningful. They sat together reading, Ethan's head on her shoulder, her hand stroking his hair. They talked for hours about their life together, reminiscing about the children when they were small, laughing over old memories. And every night before they went to sleep, Ethan would pull Lily close and whisper, I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. And Lily would whisper back, and I love you, my darling, forever and always. In the spring of 1924, Ethan had a severe heart attack. He survived, but it left him weakened and confined to bed. Lily rarely left his side, and the children and grandchildren came to visit regularly, filling the house with life and love even as Ethan's own life force waned. On a warm June evening, 40 years almost to the day after Lily had stood before a stampede, Ethan called his family to his bedside. He was propped up on pillows, his face pale but his eyes still clear, still full of love. "I want to thank you all," he said, his voice weak but steady, "for the joy you have brought to my life. Elijah, Emma, Thomas, Catherine, you have been wonderful children, and I am so proud of each of you. And to my grandchildren, know that your grandfather loves you and has been so blessed by your presence in his life." He paused, gathering strength, and then turned to Lily, who sat beside him holding his hand. "And to you, my Lily, my brave, beautiful wife. You have been the light of my life for 40 years. Everything good in me, everything worthwhile I have accomplished, has been because of you and your love. I do not know what awaits me beyond this life, but I know that loving you has been my greatest joy, my deepest privilege. Thank you, my darling, for saying yes that night at supper. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for this life we have built together." Lily was crying openly now, her hand gripping his. "I would choose you again, Ethan. 1,000 times over I would choose you. You are the love of my life, my heart, my soul. I cannot imagine this world without you." "You will go on," Ethan said gently, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You are strong, my love. You will go on, and you will be surrounded by family who love you. But know this, I will carry my love for you into whatever comes next. It is eternal, Lily. My love for you is eternal." He drifted off to sleep then, exhausted by the effort of speaking. The family kept vigil through the night, and as the sun rose on a new June day, Ethan Fairmont passed quietly away, his hand still clasped in Lily's. The grief was overwhelming. Lily had known it was coming, had tried to prepare herself, but nothing could truly prepare her for the loss of her partner, her love, her Ethan. The house felt empty without him, the world diminished, but Lily was, as Ethan had said, strong. She grieved deeply, but she also honored his memory by living fully, by remaining involved with the ranch and with her family. Thomas had taken over complete control of the operations, but he consulted regularly with his mother, valuing her wisdom and experience. The years after Ethan's death were difficult for Lily, but they were not without joy. She watched her grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and found purpose in charitable work and in maintaining the Fairmont legacy. She lived in the ranch house until her death in 1935, at the age of 75. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, and when her children came to her room that morning, they found her with a smile on her face, as though she had seen something beautiful in her final moments. Perhaps she had. Perhaps Ethan had been waiting for her, ready to take her hand once again, ready to continue their love story in whatever realm came next. They buried Lily next to Ethan in the family plot overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple but elegant, bearing both their names and a single inscription, Ethan and Lily Fairmont. Love eternal. The Fairmont Ranch continued through the generations, always in the family, always prospering. The story of how it all began, how a housekeeper stood before a stampede, and a cattle baron proposed at supper, became family legend, passed down to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was a story about courage and love, about seeing beyond society's expectations to recognize the worth in another person. It was about partnership and respect, about building a life on a foundation of mutual admiration and genuine affection. It was, in short, a love story for the ages. And it all began on a hot June afternoon in 1884, when Lily Morrison did the impossible and Ethan Fairmont finally saw what had been in front of him all along, the love of his life. the woman who would transform him, the partner who would stand beside him through everything life had to offer. Their love had been tested by time and hardship, by loss and grief, but it had never wavered. From that first proposal at supper to Ethan's dying words, their devotion to each other had remained constant, a bright and shining example of what true love could be. And on the Fairmont ranch, where cattle still grazed the California hills, and the family still gathered for holidays and celebrations, the memory of Ethan and Lily's love lived on, a legacy more valuable than land or money, more enduring than any empire. It was a legacy of love, of courage, of two people who had been brave enough to reach for happiness and wise enough to cherish it once they found it. And it would endure for as long as the Fairmont name existed, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something beautiful, something lasting, something truly extraordinary. The end of their story was not an ending at all, but rather the beginning of a legacy that would touch countless lives in the generations to come. All because a cattle baron watched his housekeeper calm a spooked herd and found the courage to propose at supper that very same night. Their love story, born in the Wild West of 1884 California, would echo through time as a reminder that true love knows no boundaries, respects no social conventions, and endures beyond even death itself.